The story of the United States Marines at Iwo Jima and Okinawa is not simply a record of military operations. It is a story of endurance pushed far beyond the limits of flesh and bone. A story of young men who arrived on the shores of two distant islands knowing that the odds were stacked against them, yet still moved forward with a determination that continues to echo through history. When American transports approached Iwo Jima in February 1945, the Marines on board had heard rumors about the island, hostile terrain, unforgiving weather, and a Japanese garrison that would choose death before surrender. Yet no rumor could prepare them for the moment the coastline emerged from the morning haze. Iwo Jima looked less like an island and more like a scarred fragment torn from the earth, a black mass of volcanic ash crowned by the brooding silhouette of Mount Suribachi. The air itself tasted of sulfur. It was as if the land were warning them of what was about to come. As the landing craft churned through the waters, the Marines prepared for a hail of gunfire. But when the first waves hit the beach, the silence was unnerving. No gunshots, no explosions, no immediate resistance. Some Marines dared to hope the bombardment had worked, that maybe the Japanese defenses had been smashed. But the volcanic ash beneath their boots had other ideas. The sand swallowed men up to their ankles, dragged at their equipment, and made every step a fight. Tanks bogged down so deeply that their tracks spun uselessly, and supply crews struggled to drag ammunition up the beach. Then, just as the beach became crowded with Marines, Kuribayashi gave the order. The silence shattered. Artillery from hidden positions in Suribachi and the northern ridges opened fire with terrifying precision. Mortars dropped into packed clusters of men. Machine guns stitched long lines across the sand, cutting down Marines who had barely taken 3 steps forward. Some were hit before they managed to fire a single shot. Others crawled through the ash, gasping for breath as explosions sent shards of volcanic glass whipping through the air. Kuribayashi's defense was unlike anything American forces had faced in the Pacific. Instead of throwing away his men in early suicide charges, he had designed a labyrinth of tunnels and bunkers deep beneath the surface, steel-reinforced chambers connected by miles of underground passageways. Japanese soldiers could fire, retreat unseen, reappear behind Marines, and vanish again. The island itself had become a weapon. Every ridge concealed a hidden gun. Every crater could hold a sniper. Every patch of ash seemed to open into another deadly tunnel. The Marines learned quickly that progress would be measured in feet, not yards, and that every foot would demand blood. Flamethrowers became the grim centerpiece of the battle. Entire teams advanced under rifle and machine gun fire, knowing that the tanks on their backs made them prime targets. Japanese defenders aimed for them relentlessly. Yet without those flamethrowers, the Marines could not clear the bunkers or caves. The sound of a flamethrower igniting, a deep, roaring whoosh, became a sound that haunted survivors for decades. Marines watched flames pour into openings and listened as the defenders screamed. There were no illusions here. This was war stripped of any romantic veneer. It was survival. It was killing or being killed. Meanwhile, Mount Suribachi loomed above the southern beaches, a constant reminder that the Japanese held the high ground. Taking Suribachi became one of the earliest objectives, because as long as its guns were active, every Marine on the beach was in danger. The climb up Suribachi was slow and punishing, the volcanic slopes offering little cover, and the tunnels beneath hiding unknown numbers of defenders. When a patrol finally reached the summit and raised the first American flag, a ripple of hope spread across the island. Ships offshore blasted their horns. Marines on the beach cheered. For a moment, amidst the horror, there was a small taste of victory. But the flag was too small to be seen across the island, and a second, larger flag was soon ordered up. The image captured that afternoon, 5 Marines and a Navy corpsman raising the Stars and Stripes, would become one of the most iconic photographs in history. Yet the men who raised it knew the truth. The battle was far from over. Iwo Jima still had weeks of savagery left.
Night on Iwo Jima brought a terror of its own. The tunnels allowed Japanese defenders to slip behind Marine lines, launching sudden attacks with grenades, knives, or small bursts of fire. Marines slept in short, shallow intervals, rifles across their chests, waking at the smallest sound. Medics moved through the darkness, guided only by groans and whispered pleas. The wounded lay in craters filled with ash, their blood mixing with the black sand. Some Marines described the smell of Iwo Jima as a mixture of sulfur, smoke, sweat, and death, a smell that seemed to cling to their skin long after the battle. Weeks dragged on. The Marines pushed north, encountering terrain so twisted and jagged that they named sections the Meat Grinder, Death Valley, and Bloody Gorge. Every bunker had to be assaulted individually. Every tunnel had to be sealed, often with explosives or bulldozers, pushing tons of earth inside. Japanese soldiers fought until they were burned alive, buried alive, or shot in their last attempt to charge. When the island was finally declared secure, after more than a month of unrelenting fighting, over 6,800 Americans were dead and nearly 20,000 wounded. Nearly all 21,000 Japanese defenders had died. Iwo Jima was small, but the cost was enormous. Yet the captured airfield soon proved invaluable, allowing thousands of B-29 crewmen to survive emergency landings. The Marines who died there saved countless others who flew above the Pacific. But even the horrors of Iwo Jima could not prepare the Marines for what awaited them on Okinawa. Okinawa was larger, greener, more populated, and far more strategically important. Taking Okinawa meant America could directly threaten the Japanese mainland, and the Japanese knew it. When the Marines and Army forces landed in April 1945, they encountered something shocking: almost no resistance. The beaches were eerily quiet, far quieter even than Iwo Jima. At first, some believed the Japanese had abandoned the island, but the truth was far more sinister. The defenders had withdrawn deep into the island's central hills, constructing layered defensive lines, caves, trenches, and hidden artillery positions. General Mitsuro Ujishima planned to bleed the Americans for every inch of ground. The Marines soon learned that Okinawa would not be a battle of quick assaults, but a grinding war of attrition. Torrential rains turned fields into sinking mud pits, tanks bogged down, trucks stalled, soldiers slipped, fell, and rose again coated in thick layers of clay. The terrain itself rebelled against them. And when the Japanese opened fire, it came in waves: artillery that shook the hills, machine gun nests that cut down entire squads, and snipers who seemed to emerge from every cave mouth. Unlike Iwo Jima's barren ash, Okinawa's greenery offered concealment for thousands of defenders who blended into the landscape.
Civilians were trapped between the armies, suffering unspeakably. Many were forced by the Japanese to stay in caves used as military positions. Others fled, only to find themselves caught in the crossfire. Marines moved from one ridge to the next, from one rain-soaked valley to another, always pushing forward, always under fire. The battles for Kakuzu Ridge, Sugarloaf Hill, and Shuri Castle became some of the bloodiest clashes of the entire Pacific War. Sugarloaf Hill, in particular, became a nightmare, an unassuming rise of earth that changed hands again and again, with Marines fighting in mud, smoke, and torrential rain, slipping on the bodies of friends and enemies alike. Kamikaze attacks intensified the suffering. The Japanese unleashed waves of suicide pilots against the American fleet surrounding Okinawa, sinking or damaging dozens of ships and killing thousands of sailors. The skies burned with the wreckage of planes crashing into decks, sending fire and shrapnel across the water. Even Marines fighting inland could sometimes hear the distant explosions. For the Americans offshore, Okinawa became a floating hell. For the Marines on land, it was a slow walk through a valley of death. And yet, even in the darkest moments, there were acts of incredible bravery. Medics crawled through machine gun fire to reach the wounded. Marines carried their friends through rain-soaked trenches, sometimes for hours. Navajo code talkers transmitted critical messages under bombardment, their voices calm even as the world shook around them. Chaplains prayed over dying men, offering the last comfort they would ever know. Officers wrote letters to families back home, trying to explain the unexplainable. As May turned to June, the Japanese defenses began to collapse. Ushijima ordered his remaining troops to fight to the death, and many obeyed. The Marines pushed into the final defensive pockets, encountering civilians who had been told Americans would torture them. Marines tried desperately to save them, but fear and propaganda had already done their damage. The final days were filled with chaos, confusion, and heartbreak. When Okinawa was finally secured after nearly 3 months, the numbers were staggering. Over 12,500 Americans killed, more than 40,000 wounded, tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers dead, and a civilian population devastated. The battle had been so costly, so brutal, that American leaders feared an invasion of mainland Japan would result in casualties beyond comprehension. It was this fear, magnified by the memories of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, that shaped the decisions of the final months of the war. But beyond strategy and politics, what remains is the legacy of the Marines who fought there. They were young. Many had never left their hometowns before the war. Some had lied about their age to enlist. Some had left behind sweethearts, farms, factories, and families who prayed for their safe return. On Iwo Jima and Okinawa, they learned the meaning of sacrifice. They learned that courage is often quiet, found not in the charge forward, but in the decision to rise again after watching friends fall. They learned that war, once romanticized, was a brutal teacher. Their stories stayed with them. Some returned home and never spoke of what they saw. Others shared their memories late in life, their voices trembling not from age, but from the weight of the past. And some remained forever on those distant islands, their names carved into white crosses and shining marble. The legacy of the Marines at Iwo Jima and Okinawa is not one of victory alone. It is a legacy of endurance, of unimaginable cost, and of young men who carried the burden of a nation on their backs. They fought on beaches of black ash and hills of red mud. They faced an enemy determined to die rather than surrender. And through it all, they kept moving forward. Not because they sought glory, but because the man beside them needed them to. Their story is not just history. It is a reminder of the price that freedom can demand, and of the extraordinary courage ordinary men are capable of when faced with the impossible.